Thursday night, a magnitude 6.0 quake popped offshore Oregon, and within minutes my feed turned into pure panic. People were posting, "Is this it? Is Cascadia finally waking up?" Here's what you came for. After that magnitude 6.0, about 183 miles west of Bandon, everyone wants to know if a much bigger Oregon earthquake is about to strike next. I dug through the official reports and I found something that most headlines completely skip. It's not the magnitude. It's not even the no tsunami expected reassurance. It's one specific detail about where this quake actually happened and whether that location can even talk to the fault everyone fears. And that detail points to a second question. What would a real warning sign look like? And are we seeing it right now? Stick with me, because once you see it, the answer flips. Here is what we know from the official basics. In plain terms, the quake registered right around magnitude 6.0, with some updates listing it as 6.1. It struck at 3:25 Coordinated Universal Time on January 16th, which was the evening of January 15th along the Oregon coast. The epicenter was far offshore, about 295 kilometers or 183 miles west of Bandon, Oregon. Depth matters because it changes how energy spreads, and this event was approximately 10 kilometers deep, so it was not a deep muffled event. Still, because it happened far out in the ocean, most people on land were not going to feel it strongly. Early reports showed limited felt responses compared to what you would expect from a magnitude 6.0 earthquake closer to populated areas, and the big headline was this: no tsunami was expected, and early updates did not indicate injuries or damage. Now the part that matters if you are sitting in Oregon or Washington and you are wondering, okay, what does this mean for me right now? A magnitude 6.0 offshore can sound terrifying, but the immediate risk usually comes down to two things: how close it is to people and what happens next, because this one was far out to sea. The shaking on land was limited, more like did you feel that than walls cracking. And the tsunami question is always the big one. The announcement that no tsunami was expected calmed a lot of folks. What about aftershocks? After a quake like this, it is normal to see more activity in the same area, mostly smaller rumbles. The odds of something larger than the main shock are typically low, but not zero, which is why you stay alert without spiraling. So tonight's takeaway is simple: be aware, keep notifications on, and do not let one offshore jolt convince you the worst case scenario is locked in. Here is the part that changes the entire story. The dot on the USGS map is not sitting on the Cascadia subduction zone. It is way farther west, out on the Blanco fracture zone, a transformed fault system in the ocean where tectonic plates scrape past each other. That area pops off earthquakes pretty regularly because it is basically built for that kind of sideways slip. Cascadia, the one people call the Big One fault, is a different beast, and it is much closer to the coastline. That is the boundary where the Juan de Fuca plate is being shoved under North America, and that is where you can get the giant tsunami making vertical motion. So when someone says an Oregon quake means Cascadia is next, my first question is which fault moved? Because that is the difference between a scary headline and an actual warning sign. Okay, so why does the Blanco fracture zone feel scary but not Cascadia scary? It comes down to how the rocks move. On a transform fault, the plates mostly slide past each other sideways. Think of two heavy suitcases brushing in a tight airport aisle, lots of friction, a sudden jolt. But the floor does not suddenly lift or drop. That is why these offshore transform quakes can be sharp and loud in the data, yet they usually do not shove the ocean straight up into a tsunami. Cascadia is different. It is a subduction zone, where one plate is diving beneath another and getting stuck, like a giant zipper that keeps snagging. Stress builds for decades, even centuries, until it finally rips loose, and that motion can heave the seafloor vertically. Picture a family in a beach house near Cannon Beach. In a transform quake, they might feel a long roll and hear dishes rattle. In a megathrust rupture, the ground can drop, water can rush out, and the clock starts ticking. So can a magnitude 6 earthquake out on the Blanco fracture zone set off Cascadia? This is where I want to be really careful, because the internet loves a domino story, but faults do not work like a movie plot. where one shake triggers the boss fight. When an earthquake happens, it does change stress in the surrounding rock, but those stress changes fade fast with distance, and they are strongest right near the rupture area. If the quake is on a totally different fault system, and it is hundreds of miles offshore, it is not automatically flipping some hidden switch closer to land. That is why most experts treat these offshore transform quakes as a separate category of activity, not a countdown clock for the mega thrust. Now, remember the one detail I told you actually matters? Here is the callback. It is not a big quake happening, it is what pattern starts showing up afterward. Because if Cascadia were truly gearing up, you would not usually see it as one random offshore jolt, you would see it in the deeper signals. So what would make me raise an eyebrow like, okay, this is different? In Cascadia, one of the biggest things scientists watch is not a big shallow quake you feel, it is the deep stuff you do not feel, slow slip and episodic tremor. Think of it like the fault quietly creaking far underground, sliding in tiny increments. GPS stations can actually measure those subtle movements, and seismic networks can pick up the faint tremor bursts that come with them. And here is the key. It is not that slow slip automatically means a monster quake is next. It is that major changes in the pattern, frequency, intensity, where it clusters, and how it spreads could signal the system is doing something unusual. That is why I keep coming back to the same point. One offshore magnitude 6 is a headline. A shifting, sustained pattern closer to Cascadia is the real story. To understand why Cascadia still keeps emergency managers up at night, I always go back to one date, January 26, 1700. There were not smartphones, there were not seismographs, and yet we can pin it down because a tsunami slammed into Japan and got written down in detail, an orphan tsunami with no local quake to blame. Later, scientists matched that Japanese record with coastal evidence here, drowned forests, buried marshes, and layers of sand that only a big wave leaves behind. That event is the reason I do not brush off Cascadia as hype. These megathrust quakes do not happen every decade, they tend to show up on the scale of centuries. That means long quiet stretches, right up until they are not quiet anymore. If you live near the coast, the question shifts from if to when, because this is where people either get numb or they panic for no reason. Oregon's emergency messaging puts it like this: there is about a 37% chance of a magnitude 7.1 or larger Cascadia megathrust earthquake in the next 50 years, and depending on which scenarios you look at, the chance of a truly massive full margin event is lower but still very real in a human lifetime. The problem is, our brains hate this kind of risk. We hear not guaranteed and we treat it like not happening, but 37% is not a coin flip you ignore. It is the kind of probability where you do not obsess every day. You just quietly set your life up so you are not caught flat-footed. If you live in Western Oregon, Washington, or Northern California, you do not need a specific date on a calendar to justify preparedness. You just need to accept that the region has a known, repeatable hazard. Here is the sneaky part. A Cascadia megathrust quake does not just shake and leave, it can permanently redraw the coastline. Researchers model that the coast could drop roughly half a metre to as much as 2 metres in minutes. That is like the ocean jumping up without the water moving. One recent analysis found that if it happened today, more than 14,000 additional residents, about 22,500 structures, and roughly 777 miles of roadway could suddenly land inside the 1% annual floodplain, and that is before future sea level rise piles on.